We're now going to be moving on to our first panel of the morning. Just to remind you that we will be taking questions, so do use the chat function to ask your questions. We're looking for this to be interactive, otherwise it's like you're watching me deliver an interview and you could just be listening to the radio. So the more you interact, the more you'll get out of it. So please do put your questions in and we'll try and get through as many as possible. I am going to emphasise that I said question, not comment. Nobody likes that person at a conference. Anybody who says it's more of a comment than a question, the great thing about being on Zoom is I will mute. So we will go for questions as much as possible. If we could start off with our panel, and I'm going to give them a really brief introduction and then they're going to introduce themselves and a few things we've asked them to think about. So first of all, we have Ghizala Avan, who's the co-CEO of Amina Muslim Women's Resource Centre. We have Cathy McCulloch, co-director of the Children's Parliament, Graeme Reekie, director of Lasting Difference, and Eddie McConnell, who does not have a hairbrush. He has informed me in the chat function. Thank you for that, Eddie. Chief Executive of Down Syndrome Scotland. So I'm going to hand over to you and we're going to have, I think it's you first, Eddie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning and welcome everybody. It's just lovely to see so many well-kent faces, and I'm already feeling my resilience reservoir beginning to get topped up, so keep spreading the love, but do not send me a hairbrush for obvious reasons. So thank you. I want to also thank Corra for allowing me to come in here today and present some views. Particularly, I want to thank them for being brave enough to call this conference Resilience. I should say to you at the top of my thoughts and contribution today that I have a love-hate relationship with the word resilience. I love the idea that resilience is an opener for honest and deep conversations about love, kindness, forgiveness, and compassion and support. I hate the idea that some people think it's a badge to wear to show how tough they are. So I just leave that as a thought hanging. So I've been asked to say a bit about how we came through the pandemic, and I thought what I'd do is start by saying how we arrived in the pandemic. So I joined Down Syndrome Scotland, my dream job. Just a year ago, last week, I celebrated my first anniversary at Down Syndrome Scotland. And I immediately began a conversation with some great people right across the country, volunteers, families, young people with Down syndrome, and a great staff team at the centre and a really solid board too. And we developed great plans, and our plans were assembled in February. You can see what's coming, can't you? And we had some real challenges to face as an organisation. We had inherited quite significant deficits. It's a matter of public record that after we hosted the World Down Syndrome Congress, we had a deficit of £280,000, which is substantial by anybody's measure. And coming into the organisation, the current year budget, as in last year, also carried a deficit in it. So our plan was to remove the deficit. We galvanised ourselves, a great group of people right across the country, and we spoke of Down syndrome in Scotland and less of Down syndrome Scotland. So it was a unifying strategy going forward, and we gave it a name. It was called Take a Step Forward, and we wanted everybody to take a step forward for people with Down syndrome in Scotland. And our plan was to launch that strategy in Down Syndrome Awareness Week at the end of March, when we have World Down Syndrome Day. And it's the week in the year when we raise between £70,000 to £100,000 in fundraised income from a whole variety of fantastic community events. So you know what happened next. COVID arrived. Down Syndrome Awareness Week was cancelled. We lost £70,000 to £80,000 immediately, and we were unable to launch the new strategy. So in a matter of weeks, perhaps even a matter of days, we went from being re-energised, focused, clear about our future, to being very uncertain, and our whole conversation was about how do we keep the lights on at the charity. It was a really dire time for us as a charity, and we also began to realise very quickly that our beneficiaries, our families and people with Down syndrome were increasingly feeling very isolated and lost in the pandemic. So what did we do? Well, we regrouped, we re-energised ourselves, we persevered. I've heard that word used already this morning. We persevered, and within 6 weeks we went online. We moved everything digital, all our face-to-face delivery of family support. Our communication support programme, ABC, was relabelled ABC at Home. And by the end of June, we had a fourfold increase in contact with families. So we saw more families in the 3 months to the end of June than we saw in the whole of 2019. And it's just evidence of the kind of stuff that everybody in this conference is capable and also took forward and did. So we mobilised ourselves very quickly. We were grateful for the flexibility of funders that's been referenced. We were grateful for the emergency relief funds. We had to have a couple of goes at them, but we were grateful to get the level of funding and to maintain that level of connection. So it was very much what I would call a transactional response to a crisis. And as we delivered and put these new ways of connecting and keeping people connected, we then began to realise that there was so much more going on here and quite deeply concerning things going on. So while we were able to, I don't like the word pivot, but people use it, while we were able to pivot our business, is that what they say? We also became increasingly alarmed at what we were finding out from our families and from young people in particular with Down syndrome. So it came at a price. The opportunity was digital, no question about that. Our volunteers, and we did a lot of partnership working, our volunteers gave us new capacity and an amazing staff team, but it did come at a price. You already, Talent, have referred to having low energy. Our resilience reservoir is low. We're very tired. I would say we're pretty exhausted. We have seen deepening inequality as a consequence of what happened in the pandemic. We saw language returning that was just shocking language that we thought had been left behind. It became a very medical model of disability that was prevailing and a very clinical approach to some of the decision making that was happening. And I totally understand. I live in a household with two people who worked in ICU throughout the pandemic, so I totally understand the pressure. But I think we made some mistakes, and we have to talk openly and honestly about them as we go forward. So I think there's been a deep impact on emotional health and well-being, and it also resulted in the last 6 weeks having to let go of 11 members of staff at Down Syndrome Scotland, which is 1/3 of our workforce. So it has had an impact in so many ways, and our challenge now is to think about how we sustain ourselves going forward. We can't do it alone. We know it has to be in partnership with lots of others. So I'm looking for lots of you to reach out to me. I hope that's been a wee bit of a potted explanation of my journey through the pandemic. I've tried to keep it quite short because I want to hear from all of you too. Thanks, Talit.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Thank you for your candour. It's really important that we are honest and realistic about what it is that we're hearing and experiencing in the third sector, and everybody appreciates that here too. Thank you. Ghizala, can I go to you next?
Yes, you can. I just want to start by talking about the fact that we talked about bouncing back from what? From where were we in the first place to bounce back to? I think that's a really, really important question. And I think some of the things for us are around, like some other organisations here today, we work with women, and we know that they're impacted due to, is there a lot of noise in the background? Sorry. We are impacted, these women are impacted due to being a woman, but also how this intersects with being Muslim in today's context, and also part of an ethnic minority group. So there's issues around blame as well. I think when we look at that, the communities feel that they're being blamed, whether it's because of Ramadan, that people were coming together and having secret parties or whatever it may be. Those issues are there and they're not going to go away. Some of our challenges, probably not different from what Eddie's talked about as well, but I think the issue was immediately we had to work from home like all other organisations. There was a disconnectedness amongst the staff team, and how did we deal with that? Well, first of all, it was about kind of having a unified purpose, reiterating some of what we're here for in the first place, and that goes back to our values, our mission statement, what is it we're here to do. Having regular ongoing meetings. We also were able to offer people 2 to 3 counselling sessions each, and bringing in professional people who would be able to do that. Another challenge was becoming digitally inclusive really, really fast. But when we did that, we knew that we were leaving women behind that really, really needed the service. So for example, women that we work with on a day-to-day basis, we weren't able to contact them anymore. Some of them were part of the ESOL group, English as a Second Language. They had really no other connections. And one of the things that we did start doing immediately is self-care, and we started doing that online, and it worked really, really well. And we were really amazed, like Eddie was saying earlier on, with the amount of participation. We had something like 3,000 people viewing these films, these short films that we were putting up. Also on Facebook Live, we were able to access experts right across the globe and invite them to speak, which was really, really helpful to get different perspectives as well. I guess with regards to funding that Marie Todd talked about earlier on, this allowed us to strengthen our infrastructure. So for example, something we probably couldn't have done before, we were able to do. We were able to build on our monitoring and evaluation processes. We managed to get a really, really good database package that we could use to monitor and evaluate our work on. We also were able to revamp our website, because if we were going to work digitally, then people had to be able to access it, and that was really, really important. So those are things that happened because of this situation, but things that are going to be lasting for a long time beyond this situation. So we were very much cushioned, and I think with regards to funding, and that happened because funders were on the ball as well. Scottish Government, big national organisations like that were on the ball, and they made funding available to the third sector. The other issue that we could build upon was having evidence-based work. This was new for everybody, so part of our approach was to gather as much evidence as possible. We phoned about 130, 140 women who were our service users to ask them how they were getting on, what was some of the impact for them in terms of COVID-19. And also we were able to partnership with institutions like Glasgow University, who were carrying out bigger surveys and research. And we were able to make sure that the work that they were doing was very inclusive of the groups that generally get missed out of surveys like this. Also, I think, finally, I would just like to say that when we say it's been tried and tested, resilience, and we as organisations have been tried and tested, I don't feel like we have been yet. And I feel that I don't know what's going to happen in 3 years' time or 2 years' time or 1 year's time from now in terms of where we're at. Because unless funders and organisations consider the intersectionality aspect and how that impacts on people, then we're always going to be playing catch up. And I think this crisis has put us potentially further back than we were before. And I think that's something that needs to be considered. We might not be able to see it immediately now, but I think in the future it will show.
Thank you, Ghizala. Again, candid. Thank you very much. And I think you're quite right in responding to a crisis. In the pace in which we have to respond, equalities get sidelined because it's the immediate response that's needed. But we can't retrofit equalities in a COVID-19 response. Quite right. Cathy, can we come to you next? Oh, can we come to Cathy next? Oh, yes, thank you, Cathy.
That's the term of the COVID-19. You are muted. Sorry about that. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. I agree. I was saying I agree with Eddie. Really, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with that word resilience as well, and the need that we all should be, and we all should fight on and not give up. But it's great to have a chance to explore that today in a bit more detail. So just a couple of minutes from me. I think the very first challenge we had was engagement with our 130 children, our MCPs, members of the Children's Parliament, most of whom, all of whom are referred to us. and most of whom have challenges that they face in their lives. And so we had to think about how do we communicate effectively with them. So that was about contacting parents and carers first and trying to think about the best platform to do that. So that meant using email, text, WhatsApp, jumping up and down in the garden and waving sometimes. You know, it was, we had to make a real effort to make sure that we engaged with parents and carers to get their permission to then engage with the children. And once we'd done that, we had to think about, well, how do we do that creatively in a way that's interesting and fun and communicates information and is relevant to children? And the other challenge for us as a staff team is we work fast and furious all the time. So we're now working remotely, supporting staff, and having creative conversations is really, really challenging when you're working remotely and digitally. That informal connection and gentle prodding and nudging is much more difficult. So we did it, and we produced our Adventures at Home pack, which we then realised would be much more useful if we could share it, and we did that. We managed to take the opportunity to share that online with all children in Scotland. The lack of children's voices in terms of what we do and how we do it has been notable. We developed our How Are You Doing survey to make sure that we could start to gather children's views aged 8 to 14 as quickly as possible. But I still think we've got quite a journey to go in terms of making sure children are equally represented at tables alongside young people and older and adults. We were grateful for emergency funding through the Wellbeing Fund, and that allowed us to produce the response work that we've done. But I think seeing some of our key partners, local authorities, government, really understandably focus all their attention and the resources on COVID made it very difficult for us to continue with our normal routines of work, our normal planning, our planning for the longer term. As you were just saying, Ghizala, thinking about the issues that we had all addressed before COVID were still there. And if we don't want to go back to being worse than they were before COVID, we really need to keep an eye on what we need to be doing in terms of maintaining progress in the longer term. And if all the funding is diverted to dealing with the emergency, then the pre-existing issues become ignored and potentially at the end of this become even more difficult and more challenging. So I think keeping an eye on the big picture while making sure that we get it right for people now is really, for us, a really, really big challenge.
Oh, it's my turn to forget to do mute. Cathy, you're not alone. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. And I think you're quite right there. The lack of children's voices in centering this. And we're going, again, linked to what Ghizala was saying, going back a little bit, and what Eddie was saying, going back a little bit in how we respond rather than being more proactive and bringing equalities, people's voices, diverse voices, young people and children's voices into decision making. And can I finally go to Graeme, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Talat, and thank you for having me along. I'm feeling a bit of a fraud. I'm having to stand here and remind myself of various years' experience in the sector. So I'm here not so much to talk about my organisation's work, but the work that we do with charities and what we've been learning from, well, you amongst lots of others over the last few months. And I think a fair amount of it's going to be a summary of what we've heard. That the challenges that organisations have had, I think primarily that risk and sustainability and survival have become urgent everyday concerns and not just abstract ideas or concerns for tomorrow. They became very immediate concerns for today. And the way that we think about time changed. You know, being able to plan a day ahead, never mind a year ahead, very much became the focus, during which people were experiencing loss of income that you know, people have referred to, perhaps also sadly regrettably losing staff or volunteers or community links and connections that people have also mentioned. You know, so many immediate challenges that that really became at the forefront of people's thinking. At the same time, there have been opportunities. I really liked Ghizala's reference to building some infrastructure for the future and trying to take some of that time to strengthen ourselves and build our resilience for the future. What Eddie was calling was resilience reservoirs. I think it's a fantastic way of thinking about it. And I think what most impressed me learning from you in the sector was your ability to change, charities and social enterprises being able to learn and to change and to stay focused on the core, what's at the heart of their work. Something that hasn't been mentioned so far, but I think also really struck us was we increasingly are encouraged to think about competition between charities and the way that limited resources are there and tendering and so on. But actually we have always been and will always be a collaborative sector. And the partnership working and the forgetting of organisational identities and boundaries and just the willingness to work together with partners across sectors really came to the fore. And I think overall we reminded ourselves and the world of the value of the sector, and that we are, like Ross said earlier, the most innovative, responsive sector. And it's a privilege to be associated with that. And we need to remind ourselves of that and take that opportunity to just remember that too. It's so important when those everyday challenges are there. So in summary, the way that I think people responded, they focused on the core purpose and they got back to the heart of the organisation, the communities and beneficiaries, and then focusing on their staff, looking after them and self-care and the well-being that was important. Going through cycles, rapid change, but purposeful change, not just being pulled out of shape and led by the challenges in the environment, but really being purposeful about that with greater clarity, not just about the challenges, but greater clarity about our worth. And that's going to be something important to hang on to in the future. And thankfully, it's been good to see a wee bit of that getting recognised in the society around us as well, the worth and the value of the work that we do.
Thank you, Graeme. I really like that sentence, actually, the greater clarity of our worth as a sector. I think that's a really, really good takeaway sentence, actually, and one that I'm going to remember and use / steal from you in my next tweet. Thank you very much for that. We've got some questions coming in, but I could do with a few more. So I'm going to take the privilege of chair by asking a question. And then I'm going to hopefully have you, of course, responding and asking questions. Otherwise, there will be an awkward silence across the whole of Zoom. So let's get some questions in. I'm going to start off by asking the panel, and you can just let me know with a wave if you'd like to respond. But let's start off with, what are the changes that have occurred over this crisis that are changes that you think are worth keeping? What has been forced to change that is worth keeping and not returning to the status quo? Ghizala.
So for me, obviously, it's the technology, the fact that we can reach so many more people. I mean, prior to this crisis, there's no way that we would have thought, if somebody had said, oh, deliver your stuff digitally, we would have said, no way, women are not going to get involved. So that's been a massive, massive one for us.
Great, thank you. Eddie.
Yes, I thank you for that, because I'll build on that. And interestingly, I would also say that amidst the crisis and everything, I saw lots of spontaneous acts of kindness and generosity with people connecting to their communities again. And I think that's something we absolutely can't let go of. It's something we know about. Everybody in this conference understands that, but it actually came to the fore, and we really need to build upon it, that kindness, that community.
Graeme, would you like to go next?
Yeah, just I think the importance of sustaining this ability to change and learn. Just keeping that going, keeping that learning going, and remembering that flexibility and ability to change.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, so I do have some questions coming in. The problem with not chairing and having you in front of me is that I can't stare at someone awkwardly until they come up with a question to fill the time. It doesn't work quite as well when there is lots of faces staring at me. But I do have a question from, I think it was Jane from National Day Nurseries Association. If you could take yourself off mute and ask the question.
It was just really picking up on a point that both Eddie and Ghizala mentioned. The fact that things that were virtually hard for have gone backwards in the decision-making process. So I think Eddie mentioned about the language that was used, and Ghizala was talking about the kind of qualities, and and we've kind of noted as well that we've kind of as a sector been making decisions on getting the economy back up and running and getting parents back to work, and completely not forgetting, but the child at the centre hasn't been the most prevalent thing, and we keep having to remind ourselves, you know, we keep having to say, but what about the children? You know, how is this going to impact on the children? Because obviously we're working closely with nurseries, so as businesses, and you know, so it's been really, we've really had to remind ourselves. So the two questions I had really was, how do we get back from that backward progress? You know, because because we've worked really hard to bring the child to the centre, and if it's language, or you know, if it is that equalities thing, you know, so how do we get back from that, and why does the panel think it's happened? Why you know, why have we gone that, as Eddie was saying, back to that medical model, and you know, just why has that happened, do you think? Sorry, that's two questions.
I'll allow it. Thank you, Jane. Who would like to go first? Eddie, can I come to you? Thank you.
Thank you, Talit, and Jane, thanks. Great questions. I'm of a view, you've probably worked out looking at me that I'm towards the end of my career, which means I'm a bit more liberal in terms of what I say and less guarded in what I say. Isn't it a shame you have to wait to the end of your career to be that way? So I think we have to push back and we have to call it out. And it's as simple for me as that. So when I saw some really inappropriate stuff going on in terms of the clinical guidance for decision making within the hospitals, I called it out within Scottish Government. I have to say, my colleagues in the Learning Disability Policy Unit were absolutely standing shoulder to shoulder with me on it. And we eventually got an equality impact assessment carried out, and we had a change in the guidance. So we have to now call it out. And I recognise that, and it's sad, but this is the other thing we need to call out. Somehow we have to give ourselves collective confidence to do this, because I know individually some of us are worried about calling that out because it might affect sadly it might affect somebody's view of us in terms of funding. How sad is that? But, you know, if we do it collectively and we hold together, then I think we will change the narrative back. I think the reason it happened is because nobody had been in this place before. It was a pandemic, and people were, let's be honest, people were very frightened and very anxious about particularly hospitals being overwhelmed. But it taught me that the commitment to equality is wafer thin. We know that inequality existed before COVID came along. It has definitely deepened, and particularly for the community that I work with in terms of people, the wider community of people and young people with learning disabilities. So we have to have honest and open conversations about this. It's not about recrimination, blame, or getting angry, but it is about saying these are our citizens. These are our fellow citizens. So I saw it effectively, I have to say, I saw it with the Black, Asian, minority ethnic community starting to push back, and I saw some of that, and I was quite inspired by that. And I sometimes think a bit of coalition of the minorities is maybe a way to go.
Ghizala, it's a good time to bring you in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think one of the issues is also about how legislation is structured. So, for example, if you look at the Coronavirus Scotland Act 2020, it doesn't acknowledge how protected characteristics combine and exacerbate discrimination. So I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge that the pandemic does not hit everyone equally, and same as what Eddie's saying with the groups of people that he works with as well. And I think, as you're saying, Eddie, I think there is definitely room to combine in terms of groups that have protected characteristics, because we could all lobby this together. I think that's really important.
Okay, Cathy, would you like to come in? Sure.
Just quickly, Eddie, I thought that was a brilliant response. Absolutely agree with everything that you said. And I think it was natural at one level because everybody was thrown into crisis. But we do need to recognise that, first of all, we tend to work in silos. So the sectors we have to admit that sometimes. Funders, government, public bodies work in silos, and we quite often are not aware of what's happening in other places. So I think there's something about the strength of the sector and coming together across silos to find out how we can provide more support to one another. And the point about being challenging and calling it out, I think, is really critical. And I think too often people feel that that's too difficult or too challenging, or you don't want to be seen to be upsetting folk. But actually, it's the right thing to do. And if we're in this for the right reasons, we have to keep our integrity at the forefront of everything and our principles, and make sure that we respectfully and kindly call out what needs to change and where the challenges are. That's the only way that we will address the point about not going backwards but moving forwards.
Thank you very much. Excellent responses. I've got a question here from Claire from Save the Children. If you'd like to ask a question next.
Sure, thanks. My question was around how we can best support our people and teams. I think Eddie spoke very powerfully at the start about the impact of the crisis and all the work that's happened to respond, but sort of ongoing now for the next few months, what can we learn from each other and how can we best support the well-being of our people? It'd be really interesting to hear from the panel about any things you've been doing or things that you've heard about.
Ghizala, can I ask you to talk a little bit about that? Because I understand that you said something about counselling support for your staff as well.
Yeah, we set that up, and we took into account, for example, other needs of staff. For example, if there's a disability, then making sure that the counsellor had that understanding and that background to look at that aspect as well. I didn't hear the question so well, so my hearing's not fantastic.
So Claire was asking about how do we support our staff as well through this and their resilience through this, and how do we create spaces where their well-being is considered? Claire, give me a nod if that's a fair assessment of Graeme. There we go. Thanks, Claire.
Okay, so one of the things that we've introduced is just, for example, meeting every week, once a week, not in a formal way, but just checking in how everybody's doing. And sometimes what's quite interesting is if you ask questions like, how are you sleeping? Because I think sometimes how people sleep reflects what's going on in their head. If they're having problems with sleep, that means that they're really tense or they're worrying about things a lot. So just checking in with people, what they're doing in their own time, just having a chat, connecting with the staff. Again, talking about the values. We've also used this time for bonding in a sense, or team building. So what we've done is we've done quite a lot of sessions on developing the team, looking at training, for example, doing things together. So we've been taking this opportunity to do that quite a lot as well. And I think for us, because we're Scotland-wide, we have teams in Dundee, in Edinburgh, Scotland, and the fact that we're able to bring everybody together as often as we're doing now, I mean, that's never happened before. So I think there's lots of different things that we can do, and we have been doing.
I'll go to Eddie and then I'll get another question in.
Thanks, Tala. I think it's a great question, Claire. Thank you for asking it. It's just so important because so I had a weekly catch up with all of my staff, and that included half of the staff who were furloughed. So I kept in touch with them every week as well, and included the 2 members of staff that we have in our team who have Down syndrome, who had a one-to-one call with me every Thursday. And my favourite call was with Megan and Cher every Thursday, because it always involved baking. So that's not to trivialise it, because I do think that our colleagues in the sector absolutely stepped up way above and beyond and into the space and the gaps that really opened up. I think it's not really fully recognised. I think it's recognised in words, but I don't think it's yet recognised in terms of a new commitment to the third sector. And I think we need to push for that. Because the reality is we did step up into those gaps that opened up. I do believe that the third sector were part of the national emergency response. I do believe we protected the NHS. I do believe that we saved lives. And I think we should be unashamed about saying that and communicating that at every opportunity. But it does always come at a cost, because our people are passionate, they're value-based, so they're driven, so they will go above and beyond. So we have to constantly look after their well-being and check in with them. I always have honest conversations with everybody. And the other thing we committed to as a team very early on is that we were acting as one. There was no hierarchy anymore. We were working as one team through this pandemic. And we committed to 3 words. We wanted to act, we wanted to learn, we wanted to improve. It was so important that we moved from a potential to have paralysis at the start of the pandemic to just act and do something and give people the power to act and do something. And my God, they just stepped up and they did innovative things. And some of them didn't work very well, but we committed to learn and then improve, act, learn, improve going forward.
Interestingly, Claire Simpson from Parenting Across Scotland has put in, is there something that we can do as a sector, as a collective, to support our staff as well, which I think is interesting. Is there a well-being response of the sector that can be created where we can lean on each other and support each other? Graeme, you said you wanted to come in very briefly.
It was just very quickly. I didn't introduce myself properly. My background's mostly in mental health, which I used to think of as no less than the way that all of us think and feel. This isn't about other people, this is about us. And I'm just conscious that the first couple of responses we had were from chief execs, many of whom are here today as well. And when we hear the words we and us, to remember that also applies to we and us. And the comment that somebody made earlier, that resilience is about the opposite of bravery, and it's just that reminder that this isn't about supporting our teams, it's also about allowing ourselves to be supported to whoever we are, and showing that honesty that we've had a lot of today.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Laura from Fathers Network, if you could ask that one.
Hi everyone, thanks. Yeah, I was just considering, and actually, I mean, I think, to be honest, a lot of the perspectives that have come back probably apply to this as well, but it was really around our financial resilience as organisations. You know, obviously, even the day-to-day programming, we were frantically scrabbling to try and make sure that we could cover the funding that we needed. But, you know, there was a point, I think, where some of the rhetoric around using our reserves and kind of an acceptance of dipping into those reserves that we've worked so hard to build up, and we all know how difficult it is to build up those sort of unrestricted reserves. So I was just really wondering if any of the panel have any thoughts around that, and also, you know, how we can maybe as a sector join together to really, you know, look at our financial resilience moving forward.
Thanks. Who would like to talk about financial resilience of the third sector right now? I know that feeling well from being the director of a third sector organisation and the year-to-year routine that we live in. Who's feeling brave?
I don't know about brave. Well, maybe come to Eddie, because I was still gathering my thoughts, but just that my gut instinct from hearing that was, well, first of all, Laura, although you're saying people will know how it feels, many won't know how it feels. They won't have reserves, or certainly unrestricted reserves, also known as free money. Wouldn't that be nice? But it has been worked for and earned. And my gut feeling was it is, you know, that stuff is there for a rainy day, or to help you through a period of survival if needed. And that's how it's been used, and it's been used now, and better to be doing that than to be inadvertently using it or investing it without knowing why. So, you know, for example, taking on funding or contracts that don't cover the full cost means you effectively subsidise them from reserves without knowing it's what you're doing. Whereas although your money it sounds like is being spent, Laura, it's being spent on either your legitimate purposes to fill gaps in services and needs in communities, or to further your purposes that focus on the core. There's then the second part of how do you rebuild those, and I think there's definitely going to be work needed to influence and to campaign with funders and with government to allow the accrual of reserves. It's reserves and surplus in the voluntary sector is not the same as profit. It's not just two words for the same thing. They're fundamentally different, and to be building funding for the future that allows the accrual of reserves, and that's not a bad thing. It's for times like we've just experienced.
Cathy, would you like to come in briefly?
Yeah, I think the whole idea of having to use any reserves to deal with this is unacceptable, frankly. And as you say, Graeme, we've worked very, very hard to get minimal reserves, and I certainly wouldn't be happy about using them for that purpose. We all have to make difficult decisions all the time in the third sector, and we've certainly lost a number of staff in the last 6 months because of what's going on at the moment. I think, going back to Claire's point about coming together as a sector, I feel sometimes that there's a bit of an unequal relationship with funders, and that they perhaps don't always get the full picture from across the sector, so that there are organisations that have the ear of funders and there are organisations who don't. And I think this could be the time to come together and have an honest conversation together with funders about the issues that we face as third sector organisations, and they'll be different for different people. But I think rather than the sort of disaggregation of conversations that have taken place up till now, this is a time when we can come together as a sector and highlight the key messages that we would like funders to take into consideration, so that everybody's voice is heard, not just the ones that have the special relationships already.
Quite right. We are, thank you very much, Cathy. Excellent points made there. And just as a very quick summary on a few of the key things that have been said, the greater clarity about our worth that Graeme said is coming through in the answers as well. And I think Cathy made an excellent point there about we as third sector organisations are often quite precarious in where we're getting our funding from. So to have reserves is really for our safety, not for the use of crises and services. So it's really important that we recognise that, and it comes back to our worth and pushing back and saying, actually, there needs to be more funding, there needs to be more investment, and more importantly, sustainability in the efforts that we have as well. Eddie saying some really important things around, and Ghizala, about the fallback into for what we hoped were forgotten ways of talking about disability, or talking about women, or talking about religion or Black minority ethnic communities, and blame placing a lot of the time around some of the communities that we work with. But also applauding the rapid increase in the way that the rapid way in which the third sector has responded, and how communities have realised just who they can turn to, and we have responded in kind, being the voice and the platform for them, as well as the services provision for them as well. So thank you so much for your questions and your comments there.